Okay, here we go again. Now, this is the second version of the competitive elemental grind game Elements tier list as of September 30th, 2023 at 5:04 p.m. Alright? So, again, before this starts, this is a competitive tier list, so my typical measure for this is typical tournament level skill. So, not usually gauging by the players that are the best of playing their elements, but are very good. Okay? A lot has changed since the last one, so as a result, I'm going to be changing the format of this video a little bit to include not just where things are placed and why, but also where they moved from last time. Okay, so without any further ado, if you have any other questions, put in the comments. Have a ball down there, discuss, please respectfully. And without further ado, let's get right into this, starting with our F tier. And this is just, these are elements that are not viable in any sense of the word. Just don't even bother, really. They might be fun, but they're not going to get you anywhere. The only one here is radiation, which is staying in the F tier. Rad has a problem. Well, many problems, actually, but the main one being you can sort of just kind of walk away from it and not get hit. It has very lackluster damage scaling, it's kind of vulnerable, it's a close range element only, and you can kind of just choose not to be hit by it. The result of this is an element that, even with artifacts existing, is still not even near viable. It's just bad. That's all there really is to it. Moving on to our D tier, what I would call the barely playable category. Just Plasma, really, for this one. Which is staying right here where it was the last tier list. Plasma, in a similar vein to Radiation, is, in this case, mostly close range. Plasma has better damage scaling, but is still extremely difficult to use. Its only long-range attack makes it a sitting duck, and it's overall just very lackluster in terms of pretty much everything. Now, let's go into the C tier. C tier is elements that are typically alright, but not a whole lot more. And staying in the C tier, at the bottom of our C tier, is Desert. Desert has Arenaceous Storm, which, as I said last time, does a lot of damage. And it does like 40,000 damage. The issue is it does that damage way too slow, and it's way too easy to get out of. Artifacts definitely did not help this problem, because cleansing just kind of lets you walk straight out of it with no repercussions. Agility, you can just dash out of it with no repercussions. And on top of this, one of the only advantages that Desert did have at the time that put it at the top of the C tier, in my opinion, at the time, was the fact that it had projectile immunity, which the artifact of piercing just completely nullifies for 10 seconds every so often, which... yeah, no, Desert is just bad. Just above it, also staying in the C tier, is Yin. Yin's only good move is the Fist, which stuns for 3 seconds if you hit it and the person doesn't slide out, which is already a gamble, so already not great. But now Artifact of Cleansing exists, which means the stun would go from 3 seconds to less than half a second or even 0 if the person accurately predicts the Fist. This, on any element, is just not a good thing. It's really bad. Not to mention that Artifact of Jade already heavily nerfed rush elements. Yin doesn't really go any lower because of this, per se, but man, it just sucks for the element. Up next, we have staying in the C tier, Snow, which is right here somewhere. Yes, there we go. Snow didn't really get buffed by artifacts. It kind of just exists. Apart from potentially a small bonus from something like, I don't know, Resilience, or by having access to Jade or Severance, Snow doesn't really go anywhere because of artifacts. The elements that Counter it didn't really go anywhere either, so it's more or less in the exact same spot it was. It's kind of all there is to it. Next up is Dola, which is up higher than Snow this time, also staying in the C tier, by the way, because Severance gives it a pretty significant buff. That and it also has access to Jade, which Dola having access to iframes is a very good thing. Essentially, it got marginally buffed by artifacts existing, and it's just a little tiny itty bit higher. What isn't a tiny itty bit higher, but rather lower, moving from the near the bottom of the B tier down into the C tier, is Demon. Artifact of Plating is an artifact that gives the user 4.5% damage reduction for 1.5 seconds per time they take damage, which these stacks, they stack on top of each other. So for very spammy attacks, the target takes way, way less damage. And the thing is, there are some elements, like Demon specifically, Demon and Yang, where this just destroys the element. You cannot win if they are using plating. And I can't really ignore that. Demon already wasn't in a great spot. Well, I mean, it was okay. It was in that it's good until it isn't spot. But now, because of plating, it just kind of doesn't do anything anymore, and that's kind of an issue. What you will notice is this is the end of our, what I would call just bad elements. Everything from here is perfectly usable, just not, in some cases, not optimal. There are still a lot of changes, and we'll go through that. Starting at the bottom of our B tier, staying pretty much exactly where it was, is Firework. Firework didn't really get buffed or nerfed by artifacts. Its damage is relatively constant, but not spam type, so plating doesn't really kill it. It air camps, nothing really nerfs that this update, and it just overall stays in much the same position. It has the advantage of air camping that nothing below it does have, aside from some of the commons, but we're ignoring those for the sake of this tier list. Has the advantage of air camping, does a pretty decent amount of damage. Its main issue is actually getting value out of that damage, which this holds true now, especially now that Jade exists, although that applies to every element. You know, I could go around in circles about this all the time, but anyway. Next on our list is Supernova. Pretty much the exact same spot as it was, although I'll mention that its power level is a tiny bit lower, just not lower than Firework. The reason for this is Artifact of Jade and Cleansing. Supernova's main issue is the inconsistency of its rushes, specifically the RNG related to Skyfall, which essentially you could do 0 damage or 25,000 in this rush, and it's all entirely up to RNG, whatever you do. And this isn't helped by both of those artifacts, making the rush always do 0 damage. Supernova wasn't in a great spot. I'm really hoping that Consecration type move that Bean said he will give it makes Supernova quite good. Next up is Combustion, which is only barely higher than Supernova, because its damage is far more constant and harder to entirely nullify with a single artifact. Combustion didn't get really buffed, per se, by artifacts. It definitely wasn't affected by them negatively. Both Jade and Cleansing separately don't entirely nullify Combustion as it would another element of similar type because of its very, very constant damage, without it also being spammy and prone to something like plating. Combustion is it's not scary until it is element. It's really, 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 non-threatening until you just barely get close enough for it to pull you in and start murdering you. If you don't have access to iframes or a good escape, you are dead. That is it. Combustion will kill you. The next element staying in the B tier is Terra. This is another case with a lot of these Ascendeds where they just kind of stay where they were, although Terra is marginally buffed by the addition of Corrosion and by the addition of Steel, actually. just a little bit, and by the addition of Jade, as a lot of elements were. Access to iframes, flat damage reduction on an element that has a mechanic that gets you very, very high damage reduction values will be good. But again, Terra not having any long range option kind of hampers it a lot. And so it sort of stays in roughly the same spot that it did. Permafrost, going slightly higher for access to a way to prevent from being pulled, specifically cleansing, and for obviously for access to iframes with Jade. This is somewhat offset by Artifact of Piercing nullifying its projectile immunity, but it's just overall alright and in much the same position it was before. And then we have Hemo, which got a fairly significant buff with the addition of Vampirism, and a rather funny overworld use case with casing, although I can't really count that for the sake of this list. It's sort of in an interesting spot in that Jade exists, so you're going to have a lot of trouble hitting its release, which is the main issue, but also get a decent chunk of addition to its survivability, which is, sort of an interesting give and take. I think that it's overall a slight nerf, but just not enough for me to have it lose spots, in my opinion, if that makes sense. Next up on the list, moving down from the A tier into the B tier, near the top of the B tier, yeah, Hydra got hit this hard. Not only does now every single element have access to the ability to escape a Hydra combo every 25 to 30 seconds in the form of Artifact of Cleansing and Artifact of Jade. Now, in addition to this, you can't unanchor Immortal Flare, so you will always guaranteed be in this sitting duck position the entire time. I've said at this point a couple times that I think Hydra needs a little love in terms of balancing. Like, it's good and it's not bad, but it's just not going to do a ton most of the time. That's all I really have to say for it, especially with those artifacts nerfing it and the actual bug fix for it not being able to unanchor Immortal Flare anymore being pretty significant. That's why it's sitting where it is. Another element moving down from the A tier into the B tier, this one is due to Artifact of Plating, Yang. Plating really, really, really nerfs spammy attacks, and with Yang, it's to the point where it practically kills the element's viability if you go against it. It's not a massive issue, usually, unless your opponent is a rat who is, constantly artifact counterpicking, but the effect of plating on Yang cannot be understated. Seriously, it's so bad. It practically guarantees the other player to win if they're using plating against Yang. And that's just this is one of the reasons I think plating existing was just a mistake. It's the fact that it just entirely kills some elements automatically is just so dumb. Anyway, moving on to our A tier. And these are all good. They typically have a 1 or 2 sticking points that keep them from being really, really strong, but they are all very, very good. Now, moving up all the way from the D tier up into the A tier is Sound. Sound recently got a semi-rework. It added extra mobility to Sound Crush, removed all of its anchors, buffed the range, and a couple of the cooldowns on the Sound Cloak and a couple of other moves. And now Sound is actually really good, especially with the Artifact of Amplification that allows it to jump even higher using Sound Crush. Sound has become a very solid option and truly fits in with the rest of the rares in that sense. Sound has pretty much always been sort of overlooked and just kind of barely better than Plasma, because all of its moves anchored, kept you in place, you still had to be close range, blah blah blah, it had no mobility, right? But now it's good, and I'm glad to say that it's good like that. And staying in the A tier, just above Sound, is Zephyr. There's no comment with this one, really. It got you know, Severance existing buffs it a fair bit, and a bunch of elements. You know, it having access to cleansing and potentially having a counter to being pulled out of the sky is a big deal, but at the same time, Jade and cleansing both exist to nullify downdraft or the entire rush. It's this give and take that kind of leaves it more or less where it was. Zephyr is a pretty good airborne option, and overall a pretty good element in terms of stuff you want to use. Yeah. That made no goddamn sense. I have brain rot. Anyway, moving down from the S tier into the A tier, just above Zephyr, is Mech. Mech got really, really hard nerfed by Jade existing. You'll see this a lot. A lot of the really, really strong rush elements or single combo elements got really, really hit hard by the fact that every element now has access to 2 seconds of iframes, at least once in a match. Mech is one of these. Before, it was very hard to stop Mech's combo because of the debuff immunity associated with electromagnetic release. This is no longer the case because you can kind of just tank it at least once, which leaves that Mech user very, very open to counterattack. Well, yes, Mech can also use both of these artifacts. It's just not enough to account for this. Seriously, it is a huge, huge deal for Mech, and it has unfortunately been taken down quite a few notches. Next up, which got buffed a little bit, still staying in the A tier though, is Toxin. Toxin got the addition of the artifact of corrosion, which increases the poison effect damage by 18%, and also cauterization seems to be the only use of cauterization that is not as a counter pick, because one of Toxin's main issues was its ability to do damage quickly. You know, natural regen actually affects Toxin's damage rate here in a very significant way, as opposed to a lot of other elements. But cauterization, while you're hitting an enemy, it gives them a debuff for 4 seconds that while the artifact isn't active, halves their natural regen, and while it's active for that 8-second period every 15 seconds, makes them heal for 80% less health. It's a lot, and it's actually fairly impactful for Toxin, warrants a little bit of a move up. Next up is Lava, and this is somewhat, admittedly, I would have put it probably in the A tier. It's moving up from the B tier in this case. However, that was sort of a misplacement last time. I'll elaborate a little bit. I just hadn't had enough experience with Lava since last time. It's a very, very, very rare element to see, and I hadn't, up to that point, really seen it do anything except kind of sit there and die. In this case, though, I have seen the worth in the element, and Lava is pretty damn good. There is also a funny possibility with mobility in terms of plumage and Lava, which takes care of Lava's inconsistent mobility problem. So it's got it's moving up a substantial amount. It's a good option if you really want to just mess around too. It's got the best iframe move in the game, fairly good temporary flight, and very good damage if you're willing to charge the moves. Next up, which is overall getting a nerf from artifact existing, is Excel. This is mainly due to Jade, and to stuff like recovery. Yes, you can counterpick and use cauterization to mitigate this, but now you're giving up your active artifact. And both of those things allow basically all elements to heal, once, maybe twice within one Excel combo, which is a big deal, and a fairly substantial downgrade to the element. There are ways to counterpick against this, as I said. You can use stuff like Vampirism to get an extra damage boost, and cauterization to limit their healing. In practice, though, it kind of sits just below where it used to. In terms of where it is, it's just okay. Excel has a very limited things you can do with it, if that makes sense. Once you hit Jet Rush, the element practically plays itself, and as a result, there isn't a whole lot of expansive tech you can do with it. With this in mind, at the competitive level, it's just very limited, and that's kind of all there is to it. Just above it, mostly here due to Jade and Piercing, is Phoenix. Phoenix is in such a weird spot right now. While good, it doesn't have a ton of things that point one way or the other to me in terms of power level. It feels more or less exactly how it was before the update, even with artifacts, which might sound really weird, and kind of is, but this kind of puts it down lower because there are a lot of things that are above it that were pushed up a lot by artifacts. Phoenix has a really great one-shot combo, which can now be countered by Jade, but it has stuff like Recovery, allowing it to get to its next revive better, Jade allowing it to get to its next revive better, Cleansing can allow it to get out of really problematic spots against certain elements like Bolt, and overall is still a really, really solid choice. Staying in the A tier as well is Bolt. The only issue that Bolt sort of encounters upon this new update is the introduction of Resilience, which halves the duration of all stuns and slows. Here's the thing, no one uses that artifact. 90% of the time when you would be using that on a Bolt, it would be better to just use Plating instead, which doesn't impact the element too much, just more than most. Bolt is just in a solid position right now. Makes alright use of Jade. You can counterpick with Caught if you have heals getting issues with that. Recovery gives it a decent amount more survivability. You can, if you really want to, use Agility, although I don't know why you would. Horse gives it a hilarious boost in speed. And overall, it's just a good option. It's hard for me to say a lot else for most of these picks, but in a lot of cases, both a lot and nothing have changed. Next up, a lot lower than it was before, is Armament. And this is mainly Plating and Jade. Every element having a chance to counterattack Arma now, unless you do the whole sitting in the sky and never coming down thing, is kind of a problem for it. That was the main advantage before, and the thing is, with Arma specifically, this is one of those placements where it's lower because something that counters it really, really hard is much higher this update, and much, much stronger. In this case, that element is Heaven's Wrath, which is actually, in my opinion, the second best element in the entire game right now. It is super, super popular. And in addition to this, Dragon Blade and Necro, both in the S tier this update, can also have a very good chance of pulling it down and just destroying it. That's the main thing with this, is Armament didn't really get much worse per se, in terms of artifacts existing. However, a lot of the stuff that counters it got way, way better. So it's just a little lower, it's still really strong, a good pick in general. But yeah, there you go. Up next is Inferno, and here we have the first of many, many rush elements that were nerfed pretty hard by Jade. Inferno didn't get nerfed at all, has access to Severance, so it got fairly stronger, but the thing is, Inferno is a fist rush element, which means it does all of its damage in a very short period of time, which means, especially Jade, and in a lot of cases, plating for Inferno, really changes the course of the match, and not in Inferno's favor. It's a fair bit lower than it was last tier list. Still in the A tier, of course. But it's just going to be a lot less effective at getting value out of its rushes, just because there's so many ways to counter it now. It used to be you'd be able to pick people off a lot easier. This is not really the case anymore. Staying in the A tier, albeit slightly higher, is Chaos. Chaos got amplification this update, which makes it considerably stronger. It is much harder to react to an element that knocks you around a lot more, as if it already didn't knock people around a ton. It air camps, which makes it very, very hard to hit for some elements. It has a lot of lifesteal, and is overall very unpredictable and very versatile, especially in 3v3s with that play swap. It is crazy good. Chaos is just a really good all-around choice that got a slight buff with the addition of amplification, and didn't really get nerfed by anything. All of the same things before the update that were problems for it still apply now, this being pulled out of the sky, which it can deal with, or simply elements that just love to be next to it for some reason. I mean, it didn't have a massive issue with Excel, but that could pop up as a problem in 3v3s. You can still get sniped by grabs, and there are some elements like Heaven's Wrath that just kind of dunk on it because it can't do a ton against those. But those things still apply. Overall, Chaos is a little stronger than last update. There you go. Moving up from the B tier into the A tier is Lunar. Now, this is the same sort of deal as Lava. I didn't have enough experience with the fighting or using the element to really make a good judgment, so I kind of just shoved them in B and went along with my life. Lunar is pretty strong as the really first anchor air camper. It is a very limited element in terms of its options. However, it is effective. Vampirism and Severance specifically, this update allow it to more consistently secure its combos, and also allow it to, with agility, stay airborne and evasive a lot better. And yeah, overall, just a very good choice. I don't have a whole lot more to say about it. It's kind of a boring element, in my opinion, but, you know, that's me. That's me. You can sue me if you want, I don't care. Next up, moving from the broken tier, which doesn't exist on this tier list, by the way, because I don't think there's anything broken this time. It's actually really, really cool, and I think this is the most balanced the game has ever been. Moving all the way down from the broken tier, all the way down into right around the middle of the A tier is Cosmic. This is because of Jade. It used to be that Cosmic could deal all of the damage for its one-shot combo before the 4 seconds of invincibility frames from Calamity were up. This is no longer the case. It can only do about 75% of a player's max HP, which is a big, big deal. It is still a very strong option, really good crowd control, nice stunning power, very consistent stunning power, which is a somewhat unique trait. Even Bolt doesn't consistently stun people for as long as Cosmic does typically. It's just got a very good all-around kit. Very nice. A tier. Moving down from the S tier into the A tier because of cauterization is Nature. Nature, so first, let me sort of explain the difference between something like Chemomancer and Necro against Cauterization versus something like Nature. Those two, Chemo and Necro respectively, can, if somebody activates Cauterization to limit the amount of healing they have, simply wait until the effect is up. This is really, really simple. Nature doesn't have this luxury, though, with Yggdrasil, because it's a tree. When you place it down, that's it. You can't just wait for the tree to, you can't have the tree heal you after the effect. No, your opponent can literally wait for the tree to be placed down, then use Cauterization, and there's nothing you can do to stop them from lowering your heals. Nature also has, the cleansing is also a thing to get out of the freezes. You've got Jade practically nullifying a rush every 30 seconds. Its survivability gets significantly better because of recovery, but it's just not really enough to offset the insane impact of Caught on it, really. Then we have, staying in the A tier, Telly. Now, the only reason this isn't higher is because 3 of the 5 S tier elements dog on Telly. I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you. Telly regained its infinite air camping properties this update, which is really, really strong. The only issue being everyone else is also playing elements that are also very good at countering infinite air campers, effectively nullifying the buff. You could be safe and put Telly in the S tier, but the thing is, at that level, you could even say that 4 of those 5 elements even counter it, and the likelihood of encountering one, it's just sort of a who's playing what and what is strong thing for this. It would be S tier if not for everything else that is S tier. Next up, moving down from the top of the broken tier to the mid-high portion of the A tier is Prism. This is for 2 reasons. The first is it was actually nerfed a fair bit. This didn't do a whole lot to nullify its power levels. It basically decreased the downtime or the uptime of its one-shot combo from essentially always to like once every 4 seconds. Which, while that sounds very strong, it was essentially the exact same as what it was before. It wasn't a useful nerf at all. It was still a instant pull combo into 10k damage, and that's the problem. What did hurt Prism a ton, though, is cleansing. With the infrequency and difficulty to hit the Prism combo, combine that with the ability for someone to just negate it entirely every 25 seconds, yeah, this is going to knock the element down a few pegs. In addition to this, a couple of the elements in the S tier counter it, and a couple elements got their get back to sort of put it back in its place. And as a result of this, Prism is sitting comfortably in like the middle top half of the A tier. Moving down from the S tier into the A tier, because of a nerf and because of Jade existing, is Dragon. This is another Fist Rush element that was inherently nerfed with Jade existing and probably would have been moved down to the top of the A tier regardless, but in addition to this, rather than Dragon's Flame Breath damage being a range from 24,000 damage to 36,000 damage, it now always does 25,150-ish damage, aka almost exactly what you need to kill a max level. It always does enough, but it's basically exactly that. Well, a couple of the new artifacts passively give damage reduction, and in the case of Artifact of Jade, the most popular active artifact, it gives 6% passive damage reduction, which is enough to survive a Flame Breath. This is why Dragon is so low right now. Now, Bean did accept a suggestion asking that it be buffed to 28,000 damage, which I actually support. This way you can't survive Flame Breath without both artifacts passively giving you damage reduction. It's going to make it just a lot better, and kind of where it should be. Next up is Destruction. This is for 2 reasons. The first... Oh, well, no, like this. What am I doing? The first reason is Artifact of Jade. Cases where a one-shot formerly would have hit can now just be negated by Jade. That's the first reason. The second reason is most of the stuff that it's very good against also got nerfed. Dest is a very strong sort of anti-meta pick in terms of projectiles. Well, let's look at what was strong last update. Obsidian, Arc of the Elements, Dragon. Mainly these elements that use a lot of projectiles for it to absorb. This is no longer the case. Not one of the elements I mentioned are in the S tier this time. And as a result, it kind of goes down. In addition to this, a lot of elements' ability to regen with recovery and plumage in some of the cases for elements that formerly really, really hard, impossible countered, sort of decreases the overall efficacy of the combo and sort of pushes it down a fair bit. An element that was pretty heavily buffed by the artifacts, though, we gotta talk about Illusion, baby. See, Illusion actually got a life balance cooldown nerf the last time one of these videos came out, and it was in an alright spot. But the thing is, there are 2 artifacts that came out of this update that make Illusion really, really, really good. The first one of those is the Artifact of Horse, which passively just increases the movement speed of the user by 30%. On most other elements, this generates just a decent boost. Like, Destruction goes from Destruction speed to Yang speed, which is fairly fast. But with Illusion, this can get absolutely ridiculous, and they can just become completely untouchable. It is crazy. The second artifact that makes Illusion this strong is Agility, which is a dash when every 3 seconds when pressing R. That's the cooldown on it, alright? But this dash is based on your walk speed, which means the element that is the single most effective on is Illusion. Illusion is just way, 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 way harder to hit now, and that's all there is to it. It is a really, really, really funny thing to just see an Illusion zooming across, because, I mean, it was already a very common sight to see Illusion steal from a bunch of people on the God Rock, and just boom, become the Flash and go way across the map. But now with Horse, it's even faster, and with Agility, it even has vertical mobility, and Contemporary Air Camp, which is a pretty big deal. Torrent is also staying in the A tier, just above Illusion. If you can consistently hit Turbulent Wave, the existence of Cleansing and Jade respectively do almost nothing to nerf this element. It gets a fairly decent damage boost in the form of Severance and for Vampirization, and it has access to iframes now, which is a pretty big deal for it. It does very good passive close-range damage, very good active long-range damage, and has a very good defensive move in the form of Riptide. Just a very solid option. Takes a very, very, very good level of aim to use Torrent effectively, but for the skill list, that's obviously what we're assuming. Torrent, high A tier pick, very good. Going down from the S tier into the A tier is Krampus. The reason Krampus was and historically was so strong was how hard the combo was to escape and how much damage it does. Both of these things are irrelevant with the addition of Jade and Cleansing. Every element gets at least one shot to get out of Krampus combo, which is a big deal. It's a very common theme, this list, that a lot of the elements that like to do all their damage at once got nerfed and can't, and especially specifically elements that can't hold that same high damage output constantly. And Krampus is definitely one of these. In addition to this, a bunch of elements that can pull it down and or stun or stop it are also in the S tier. I'm pretty sure every single S tier element can pretty accurately deal with Krampus most of the time. And this is sort of the result of that. Next up, moving down from the broken tier into the A tier, again, all 3 broken tier elements ended up in the A tier, Arc of the Elements. This is because Chromatic Crystal got nerfed. Chromatic Crystal's uptime was majorly nerfed, with a duration of 9 seconds now, and a cooldown of also 9 seconds, I think, or maybe it's 7 second uptime, 9 second downtime. Doesn't matter. Significantly nerfed the element, in addition to Jade also existing now, in addition to Cleansing also existing now, in addition, all of these other things that have nerfed the other Rusher elements. Arc is no exception here. It's consistently better due to its versatility. However, it's just, it's just not quite as good as it was. This is sort of where it should be, in my opinion. It's pretty balanced as it is. But, yeah, it's definitely not broken like it was. And then another, moving down from the S tier into the A tier, is Obsidian. This was somewhat of a hard choice for me, and I actually got feedback from other people that told me to move this downward. And this is Jade existing again, really. It's really, really dangerous for Obsidian to sit next to its target after a rush, and the fact that they can always survive one is kind of a problem for it. It did get a pretty substantial buff in the addition of Corrosion, causing its bleed damage to go 18% higher than it already was, which was already insane, by the way. Obsidian could already do rushes of damage well in the 100,000 range. It was ridiculous. And it also makes it the only Fist Rush element consistently capable of always killing its target, provided they don't have anything in this update anyway. Obsidian is a really, really strong option, and we'll end out our A tier with that. Moving from the A tier into the bottom of the S tier at the number 5 spot Necromancer. This is all because of one artifact, Plumage. Necro's biggest weakness before this update was how slow and weak it was before it could get souls and shield. However, Plumage allows it to have acceleration level mobility from the jump. It allows it to actually dodge things. It allows it aerial mobility. Necro got such a huge buff from Plumage. It is ridiculous how strong Necro got. In addition to this, it also got access to Jade. Necro's invincibility frames before were conditional on it having marked a target, which is a big deal. And there are a lot of cases where this was a major limiting factor for it to be able to survive. Well, now it has Jade and can just do it whenever it wants. Well, within reason, obviously. It has a 30-second cooldown. But, it basically has 2 graveyard dodges when it, on demand. On top of this, a bunch of the elements that hard counter Necro were nerfed by the artifacts existing. So it just kind of catapulted to the S tier. Just above it, finally, we got it back from the A tier into the S tier is Time. Time got the addition of Severance and of Balance, which is another one-off good artifact in that it's only good on one element, and that element is Time. Artifact of Balance increases the user's max HP by 20%, but decreases their damage by 20%. Okay, that sounds kind of bad. Except on an element that gives no shits if you decrease its damage output. Time's past bomb spam and slash kill one shot literally do not care how much health you have, and they will still just melt you about the same speed. Actually, they just don't care. It's basically just a 20% health buff. In addition to this, Recovery, Jade, Cleansing are all useful to Time. The only issue, and I guess Time would be in the number 3 slot if not for this, is that Plumage and other dash artifacts can be used while a player is slowed in the slow beam, which this was true of Acceleration's agility passive before the update. This is not anything new. It just applies to more elements now, and that's a slight nerf. But it also got its momentum cancel back, so it can actually hit stuff well again. The slow pillar is actually a threat again, which puts Time back where it is rightfully into the S tier. In our 3rd place slot, formerly of the 1st place slot, staying in the S tier, is DB. DB is really, really strong. It has a constant semi-high damage output. It has very, very high damage reduction for Tenacity. It has very good damage mitigation for Dodge. Crit mode is just ridiculously strong with stunning and damage. And it has Spellbound, the ability to escape pretty much everything every second, provided the person is on the ground. It's got good mobility for pretty much all of its moves. And can kill air campers with Unrelenting Slam, bringing those players all the way to the ground and stunning them. Prime killing time. DB got nerfed a slight bit with the addition of Jade. Not allowing it to get health back quite as easily in Tenacity is what I found to be the best use of Jade against Dragon Blade. But other than that, it didn't really get nerfed by artifacts, and it's just sort of staying right here. HW, on the other hand, which is staying in the S tier, but is now at our number 2 spot. Remember how I said that Telekinesis can infinite air camp again with agility? Guess who else can infinite air camp with agility? Heaven's Wrath flying was sort of like a semi-joke. It's like, oh, it has wings, it should fly. With everyone obviously knowing that would be insanely broken. Well, not insanely broken right now. We'll get into it. At the time, that would have been insanely broken. Sort of as a joke. But Heaven's Wrath with the agility and the anchors of the moves it provides can literally stay airborne forever. So some of the elements that would usually give it trouble before, like Krampus, not anymore. Not anymore. It can avoid pretty much any rush element just by being off the ground, unless that person direct hits you with the fist. But you were going to die anyway if that happens, so, we're going to ignore that for the sake of this. HW also didn't really get massively nerfed by any artifacts. Both in Jade and Cleansing separately can only deal with half of each of the advantages of Heaven's Wrath attacks. And as a result, since those were the main two that were pretty much out here nerfing elements, like Obsidian, Arc, Torrent, or not Torrent, sorry, Obsidian, Arc, Death, Dragon. Jesus Christ. That, as a result, it just gets to keep its status and go up even because of its ability to air camp. It is a super, super strong element right now, and the one that I would say is the best, unless you have really, really ridiculously good aim. And speaking of that, number one is Solar. Wart is going to be so happy that I put Solar number one. But here's the thing. Solar was in the A tier formerly, and is now in the top of the S tier. And the reason for that is before, you had to be able to, like, dodge and move, while also being able to aim the beam. But the thing is, with the availability of Jade to Solar, it can now dodge one rush while staying relatively centered under the beam, which makes it infinitely easier to aim, infinitely easier to use, and on top of this, for a good Solar, as we're assuming here, it makes it pretty much impossible to counterattack the element. Solar is crazy, crazy strong. It's not really widely used because, again, the beam is still pretty difficult to aim. Understandable, but man, is it strong. Anyway, this is your final screenshot. If you really want to know and have a final screenshot of what this is, there you go. There it is right there. I'm really, really excited to hear what you guys think in the comments about this. I spent a ton of time making this tier list, and I think you all will, I hope you all will love it, and it will serve us well until the next update when Fiend shakes everything up again. I do have to apologize for my somewhat hiatus. Since last update, I have had a lot going on. Just in general, just in general, I haven't been playing Egg as much. But yeah, thank you very much. At any rate, thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a good time, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.